In this lecture, we will discuss defect life cycle. From our earlier discussions, we have understood that the main intention of performing testing on a product is to find the defects in that product. So defects become the focus of all software testing efforts. The goal of the testing team is to find as many valid defects as possible. When we say valid, it means that they are real defects which are accepted as defects by the development team or the business. The more valid defects we find and fix, the better the quality of the product is going to be. In this lecture, we will have a look at the journey or life cycle of a defect, that is, how a defect is raised or created, what all stages it goes through, and finally, how it is tracked to closure. So let's start. Before we go to the defect life cycle, let us again refresh some of the important points about defects. So if you can recall what is a defect is an anomaly in the system caused by a software bug, or in simple terms, a deviation from expected results. For simplicity, we will use the term defect as a synonym for terms like bug, fault, error, issue, failure, etc. So a defect is an undesired experience in the software which needs to be fixed. Now, what could be the reasons for occurrence of defects? As we have already seen throughout this course, there are various reasons of factors which might lead to occurrence of defects. Let us see some of these reasons. The first reason or factor could be ambiguous requirements. Sometimes the requirements are not clear or missing or may be misinterpreted. These requirement ambiguities may lead to incorrect design and coding. Finally, if the testing team is smart and diligent enough, it will be caught and raised as a defect. So ambiguous requirements might be one of the reasons for defects. The next reason might be an error in designing. The requirements might be right, but the design team made a mistake which went undetected through the coding phase and was finally caught while testing the product. So design errors is also a reason for a defect being raised. The third and more frequent reason is related to coding mistakes. While developing the code, the developers might make mistakes or misinterpret something which might lead to a defect. Coding errors might also happen due to runtime errors. Since the developers do not perform system testing, some of the runtime scenarios might cause variables to take invalid values, resulting in defects. It is the responsibility of testing team to discover all such runtime errors and log defects. The environment in which the application is running might also be a reason for occurrence of defects. Software environment will include factors like operating system, system resources, memory, permissions, load on the network, hardware configuration, etc. For example, an application runs smoothly on Windows 7 32-bit machine, but when tested on a 64-bit machine, it ran into few issues. Then we can say the defect was caused due to change in operating environment. Test team has to run the application in all environments to ensure that the application runs smooth on all of them. Sometimes, even when the application is working fine and meets all customer requirements, the test team can report an issue or a suggestion to the development team or business. Using these suggestions or enhancement requests, test team can suggest some improvements in terms of user interface or functionality which will be useful to end users or which can improve product quality. So all these issues can be logged as enhancement requests. So these are some of the reasons why defects can arise in an application. Whenever this happens, the test team will log a defect. Good. But what happens then? Is that the end of story? No. Logging defect is just the beginning. The defect undergoes a lot of transitions and will need to be tracked at every stage until it reaches a consented closure stage. This is called as the defect life cycle, which we will discuss now in detail. We saw the conditions under which a defect might be raised. Now we will see what happens to defect once it is raised. As we already mentioned, the defect that is raised has to be tracked at every point of time. During the testing phase, the test team will keep raising new defects and development team will keep fixing them. When there are too many defects, keeping track of defects and their statuses manually will be confusing. So usually every project team makes use of some defect management tool to keep track of all defects. Now the statuses assigned to defects will differ with each of the defect management tool we use, but there are few basic states every defect goes through. Now we will try and understand what these basic states for every defect are. When a defect is raised, it is assigned a new state. Quite simply, it means that this is a new defect discovered now. Along with status, a defect will also have some other details like in which part of the application the defect was found, who found it, steps to reproduce the defect, screenshots if any, severity and priority of the defect, etc. We will be discussing more on this in a separate lecture called Logging Defects. For now, we will say that a new defect is logged with all required information. That is the first status for any defect. Next, usually a test manager or a business manager will review and approve or transfer it to the development team for open. Again, this is not true with projects, but in general, we can say that this is the phase where the defect is logged but is not assigned to any specific developer. We can say that the defect is in open state. After this, the development team manager will review the defect and assign it to the specific developer against whose module or code the defect was raised. During this, the status of the defect is changed to assigned. This will indicate that the defect is with the developer and he or she is working on fixing it. Sometimes, if a developer finds that the information related to defect is ambiguous or needs more information to reproduce the defect, then the developer will send the defect back to open state with some queries to the test team or business team. The appropriate team will respond back with clarifications and then the defect is again assigned back to the concerned developer. Sometimes it might happen that the development team will reject a defect. It means that the defect is invalid. There might be various reasons for that. An inexperienced tester might have logged a defect incorrectly, or the defect might not be a defect at all. It might be as per the design which was not known to test team. In such cases, the development team changes the state to reject it and the defect is ignored. There might be a chance that a defect might be assigned a deferred state. For example, if the business decides to leave the fix for the next release, or if the defect is too minor to spend time on, then the development or business will change the status as deferred and the defect will be pushed down the priority list. Please note that deferred does not mean invalid. It simply means that right now the defect is not important enough to be fixed. So the fix is postponed to a later date. Okay, rejected and deferred statuses do not occur often with defects if the testing team is well experienced. So what happens to normal and valid defects which are logged by the testing? Well, they get fixed. The developer will work on the erroneous code and fix it, test it from his end, and if it works fine, he or she will change the status of the defect to fixed. The developer will usually provide some information as to what caused the defect, how it was fixed, and how to check for the fix. Once this is done, the defect will be passed on to the test team and the status will be changed to pending verification. This simply means that the test team has not yet tested the fix. Once a QA or tester is assigned this verification, the status will be changed to retest, which means the defect is being retested after fix. If the tester found that the issue is still occurring in their test environment, or if the fix has given rise to some other minor issue, then the tester will resend the defect back to the open state. From there again, the defect can take any of the paths mentioned before. But in case the tester found that the bug was successfully fixed with no new issues, he or she will change the defect status to verified, which means that issue is successfully resolved and can be closed. Lastly, after discussion with business, a team lead or manager will change the defect status to closed. When a defect is closed, it means that the defect no longer exists in the application. So as you can see, a defect undergoes various changes in states and all these changes are tracked at every point in time. Tracking not only provides clarity on the defect status, but also provides a reference point for developers and testers in future if any similar issue reoccurs. If a similar issue reoccurs, a tester can either reopen the bug or open a new defect, and the developer can use the old defect fix as a reference to provide a faster fix to the new defect. So that's it for this lecture. In the next lectures, we will see how to actually find the defects in a software and how to log these defects correctly. We will also discuss some defect management tools and provide a hands-on view of how defects can be logged and tracked.